All right. We are live. Hi, Kirk.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm pretty good. Yourself?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. Let's go ahead and let's show some display names.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Do you want classic, minimal, or block?
Oh, I'm not smart enough with design to have a preference.
We'll go classic. We'll
All
go
right.
classic. So, thanks for anybody who's tuning in. Looks like we have some eyeballs on us, and depending on, we're actually streaming this from the StreamYard platform, so it allows us to see comments coming in. So if somebody wants to comment just to test that out, that would be really cool. And we're doing this on Facebook and YouTube at the same time. So before we get into it, I do want to talk about the format of these and what brought us here today, and then we're going to get into it. So I'm Tim Sarantonio of Neon One. I am director of corporate brand, but I also am one of the facilitators of what is called the Connected Fundraising Community. And the Connected Fundraising Community is a collection of folks. Doesn't matter if they're using the software that we provide. We're not going to be talking about that today. Um, what it is folks who are interested in making better connections with their donors and their supporters and their community. And so we went in late 2023 or 2022 to our community, and we actually did a crowdsourced, what do you want to talk about? What are you struggling with? And Kirk, did you hear this? I use FigJam. Did I tell you what we actually did?
No.
We used FigJam, had a Zoom call, and we let people. I said, here's categories for donor insights. Hey, thank you, Mary Beth Wells. That is showing that the chat functionality works from Facebook. So awesome. Thank you, Mary Beth. So that proves that we can do the whole thing, Kirk. So yeah, we did a Fig Jam, which is just a tool from a company called Figma, and they provide some fun things for product things and discussions. And so Fig Jam is a way that you can basically do a virtual kind of ideation session. And
Okay.
it's like take some digital post-it notes and throw it up here. So we said, go in and we want to talk about either donor insights, technology, or fundraiser support. And fundraiser support's more like the back end support, mental health, for instance. That counts there if we wanted. Burnout actually is something that came up there. And we said, come up with whatever. And then we let people vote. And then we went back to the Slack channel and said, okay, this is what we're thinking. Are we missing anything? And we came up with 12 of the top ideas. And then the format is we're going to invite a very smart cookie to come and talk about it. And so, Kirk, today's session is on donor retention. You're kicking us off. We want to thank you for doing this experiment with us. The format is we're going to kind of chat about the topic, which is donor retention, for maybe about 10, 15 minutes. And then Mary Beth has shown that people can type in. So during the time that we're talking, or during the session itself, and we're going to aim for a half an hour, these are going to be quick hits. Ask whatever you want, folks. We have an expert. So we're going to introduce Kirk, and then we're going to get into the thing. And then you can ask whatever you want on the topic, and we'll try to get to it. Also, we'll go back to the Slack group and put in some further resources. So Kirk, if you even want to like ping me afterwards with some things that you think would be cool, but at the very minimum, we're going to point people to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, which Kirk and I both are members of. And that is the largest industry analysis of retention currently. But I'm talking too much. The expert is you, Kirk. Kirk, tell the folks who are watching, and this is being recorded too, who are you? And
Sure.
why can you talk about retention?
Sure. So I've been in the nonprofit sector since 2007. I have led fundraising teams and nonprofit operations teams, and I've consulted, especially in when we talk about like fundraising process, data analysis, database administration, all of that. So I have a mathematics background. which makes me incredibly nerdy. But at the same time, like I have found my love in nonprofits, and even though right now I'm trying to decide what I want to do next with my life, the fact of the matter is I love working in nonprofits, and I'm not going to leave.
Yeah.
So trying to use my degree, my expertise in fundraising and try to help fundraising where possible, and yeah. So I've definitely led stewardship teams. So thinking about things from the practical standpoint, and then looking at things from the metric standpoint of retention.
So for folks, we're going to start with the basics, right? Because I wanted to start with retention because it's such an important topic, and we'll get into why it's so important. But it should be noted, uh, in 2 months we'll be doing nonprofit lingo and terms as well. So next month we're going to focus on human-centered technology, and be joined by Tim Lockey of the Human Stack. But nonprofit lingo and terms and things like that, always important. So let's start with definitions. What exactly is donor retention, Kirk?
Sure. So donor retention at its core is whether or not you are able to keep a donor after they have interacted with you uh, initially. If we want to talk about kind of the way that we technically define this, it is usually um, if a donor has donated in a particular year, do they donate in the next year? That is your retention at the base level. It can be manipulated. It can, you could talk about different time periods. You could, there's some donors who might donate on 2-year cycles or 5-year cycles or all sorts of things. But generally, we look at it from an annual perspective,
Mhm.
and we try to figure out what is the likelihood really of somebody to give in a year after they are initially acquired.
Well, and why is this important?
Well, so first of all, acquisition is expensive. I mean, if anybody who's ever heard, any company that does sales talk about how it is cheaper to retain a donor or retain a customer than it is to acquire it, really that's kind of the crux of it. Is you tend to pay a lot of money to acquire a donor. Some of the research that Jim Greenfield has done, and he's on the FEP with us.
I know I got his
You,
book somewhere around here,
he
actually.
yeah,
So,
he has a number of articles and books, and back in the 90s he was talking about it costing $1.50 to acquire a donor per dollar that you get from them.
yep.
It is expensive to acquire a donor. And in fact, most cases you are not going to recover the money you spend on acquisition the year that you perform acquisition. So the only way to get that back is to keep that donor and have that donor give again.
Well, can't you just keep acquiring new donors? Can't you just keep getting new people?
Well, I mean, obviously, there's an upper limit. It's probably sitting at about 8 billion right now, but it's very unlikely you are going to acquire every person on the planet. There's a lot of charities with very small catchment areas. Like if you think of like a city public library, you're probably not going to get a lot of donors outside of that municipal area. And so, the more you acquire, especially if you create an environment where they don't want to stay, you're basically going to burn through your entire population, and then you have nobody to give again to you, and you're going to end up running out of money.
Yeah. And we have another comment which showing that the YouTube side works, which is Mario Hernandez. And Mario's been active, recently connecting with me on LinkedIn, actually, which we chose not to do explicitly for the streaming here. Because one, we wanted to see how Facebook and YouTube work. So both comments work. So folks, if you have questions about donor retention based off of even these simple definitions, let's start doing it, because Kirk, one of the cool things that I want to make sure we get into, and we could do that a little bit later, but you're going to be speaking about some of those costs, right? Like this is a big thing that you talk about, and you're going to be at AFP Icon and NTC talking about kind of how to calculate that type of stuff. I want to make sure we get into that, because it's so cool how you've been approaching that. But let's maybe even dial it back. What are some major misunderstandings about donor retention itself? Because I think you've helped open my eyes too. As a member and vice president of the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, you've started saying, yes, but like you got to go deeper here. We got to go deeper. So, Kirk, what's a big misunderstanding that even longtime fundraisers might have around donor retention?
I was talking to a friend earlier this morning. We were looking at their data and their overall database retention rate, which is the way that we define it under the FEP, and that is basically every donor you had last year, how many of them were retained. If you look at that number for this particular friend, it's relatively static for a 10-year period. It stayed, it had its ups and downs a little bit, but it stayed pretty consistent. What was really interesting is when we broke it down to new donors and then donors who weren't new. So when we define new donors, we're saying last year was the first year they had ever given a gift, and then everybody else was people who had given gifts prior. They might be repeat donors, so giving consecutively. They might be recovered donors where they lapsed a few years, so they missed donating a few years, then came back. But when we separated out new from everybody else, the new donor retention was tanking over the 10 years, and the what I just refer to as existing donors was increasing over that time. And like the two lines crossed like this, and then that overall database retention rate just sat pretty much straight in the center.
Yeah,
And really it's about different audiences may have different retention rates.
yeah,
And so there's a level of you could see an increase in overall retention simply because of the overall database makeup. Overall database retention rates fine to measure, to put on your dashboard, to watch for, but it's very important to understand that an increase or a decrease isn't necessarily indicative of a particular stewardship strategy that you have employed or failed to employ. Uh,
so how does that practically start to get put together in a planning like standpoint?
Yeah. So I mean, retention has to always be front and center in terms of one of the main things you need to think about. Um, what's really useful, like rather than going and trying to separate out your database into 5,000 different ways, all the channels, all the like, you could go into analysis paralysis pretty quickly with that. What you might want to start doing is targeting particular groups. You might go, okay, new donors. What are things that we can do? But like, let's create a welcome series. Let's make sure that we're calling them to thank them within a certain amount of time. Whatever strategies you want to employ, but you measure that particular group and you look at their retention and you compare that with the overall and you go like, is new donor increasing but overall is staying the same? Okay, there's probably a group that we're now not stewarding properly. And then you can really start to focus strategies on particular groups. If traditionally peer-to-peer fundraising is really bad at retaining donors because their relationship is with the person who is participating in your run, walk, bike event.
Yeah.
So what are strategies that you could employ to bring them into the fold um, on their own and create that relationship between your organization and that particular donor. So yeah, basically you can just start breaking down one thing at a time and then look at strategies to increase for that particular group.
And don't forget, folks, we're hitting about the halfway point in our discussion today. So if you had a question for Kirk, obviously we have an absolute expert here. Throw it into the chat. We can see it whether you're on Facebook or the old YouTube. That's what we're kind of seeing here. So if you have a question, type it out. Mario and Mary Beth proved that both platforms work. So looking forward to it. So especially because so many organizations, regardless of if you're in, because you're in Canada, right? But retention's a global problem.
Oh yeah.
So no matter what though, like especially small organizations, they can get very overwhelmed and they might even have a board of directors who are just pushing them acquisition. Let's do an event. This type of stuff. Like let's kind of break those down into a few different components while making, the moment somebody asks a question, we're going to shift on over to that. But I think it's really indicative to go, okay, there's a lot of pressures on acquisition as a primary investment that might come from the board. And then also the other thing here is that a small shop in particular might feel very overwhelmed even if the board's supportive. So let's break those into two different things. How do you get a plan together, and then how do you get buy-in on a plan?
Good question. So plans have to be around. I mean, you can set up a plan for every donor, like in terms of like we're just going to do this with each donor. So that could be like phone calls. Um, small organizations usually can do phone calls a lot easier than large organizations just because of volume. But you can set up just a simple like we want to make sure that every donor gets X, whatever X is. Um, there is always going to be a proclivity to, oh, we've got this big donor who gave us, a $10,000 gift. It's bigger than we've ever had. We need to make sure we focus all of that attention there. But usually those donors come from that larger pool. They're usually the people who have had some relationship with you prior. So it's important to first of all recognize that, and then second, you want to try to find activities that you can reasonably do with the resources you have for all donors. And then if there are particular cases where you feel it's important to do additional things, you can do that. One thing you want to avoid, though, and I've seen this time and time again, is um, creating a gap. So, for example, I worked with an organization that made sure they called every donor like within a week if they had given a gift over $500.
Hmm.
But the people who never received phone calls were monthly donors who gave $50 a month. And it's like that, from the standpoint of somebody who gives a single $500 gift in a year versus somebody who gives $50 a month, the person who gave 50 a month actually gave more. And yet there was no strategy for that particular person. It was kind of like if we don't call them, they won't cancel, right? Kind of that fear based, let's not rattle the monthly givers. But it's really, yeah, so really important to do that. The buy-in the buy-in can be really difficult, especially if there's not a lot of value associated with that stewardship.
Hmm.
And so, like in an ideal world, if we wanted to test stewardship, what you'd have to do is you'd have to basically find a plan for stewarding donors and then actually take some of those donors out of that plan and like not thank them and see what kind of bad things happen. And most places are generally not going to want to do that. So you might just have to trust me on this. But the like the word I like to use, or the phrase I like to use, is that your top fundraising group in any charity is your stewardship team. They are the ones who are creating the entire environment for people to be retained, and for people to feel valued and feel that they've made an impact. And I know that we've discussed the word impact before, but
Right.
that's for another day. But it helps donors feel that, and so if you really want buy-in, I mean, good way to do it is to test, to take some people out and to show what kind of dangerous place that creates. But usually, I found a lot of buy-in comes from just if you can get leadership at any organization, whether it's the board or whatever, to one, be involved. The board
Yeah.
should be making some of those thank you calls. And two, um, basically kind of getting everybody within the organization to try some of these stewardship strategies. I have met very few people in the fundraising world who do not feel amazing after making a donor phone call. Uh,
I yeah, I actually, it's funny. I got a call earlier today. Oh, and I think we have a oh, okay. I'll take a look because I no, okay, let's see. Well, I got a donor call today from somebody who was like, "Thank you for your gift last year." I like let it go to voicemail. Sorry, Deborah's Place. I will, get back to you. But like, it's been a day here, folks. It's a little snow day, but like, it stood out. I remember their name. And it also Google, I didn't have them saved, and now Google's automatically translating the number from the organization into my like caller ID because it's like, is this a scam or not? And it's like, well, it's not. Okay, more importantly, Mary Beth asks, little off topic, but any suggestions for overcoming data quality issues or ideas to help cleanse the data and ensure that you have correct contact information for lapsed donors and try to renew and recapture? I don't think that's off topic at all, actually. Kirk, oh, I mean, we both can nerd out, and this leads into a question that I have for you, but go for it.
Sure. So
It's
I
a
mean,
great question for Mary Beth.
there's lots of strategy. So first of all, there's your technical solution. So I know you in the United States have something similar to us here, national change of address,
Yep.
right? So when people move, they let the post office know that they're moving, where to forward their mail, and that is information that can be purchased and applied to a database.
Hmm.
Um, the more information you get from people early on to be able to update information is really important. This is where phone calls are really beneficial. If you work into your process things like, "Hey, can we just confirm your information here?"
Yeah.
That those are always great processes. Um, Being very on top of any returned mail is really important. Um, I know it's a lot of work to to open up every one of those or look at every one that has this person is no longer here and changing your database, but it is very important.
Can I say something really funny on
Yeah.
that? Because national change address is about the data typically thrown out there is 11% of U.S. citizens move each year. Um, and I remember working at my job, kind of laughing where we'd run the NCOA update, but then I'd still get stuff back from the mailing house. And it's like, you have to understand that there's a lag between the government database and like people going like, I just moved and I didn't like bother to submit the form to the government to forward my mail. So you got to do both. People can't just go, I did the data thing automatically. You got to have a process for the physical thing that your mailing house or you might get back if you're not relying on a mailing house for that type of thing. So,
Absolutely.
so yeah, keep it going in terms of the data hygiene.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is always going to be manual, unfortunately. Um, and there are always going to be data quality issues for which like there are not good solutions for. I've told people before that like just expect 5% duplicates in your system just because every time you have to undo the next duplicate, it's going to take more work, right?
Yeah.
It's diminishing returns. But going through and, like, trying to match up email addresses, looking at any phone numbers and talking to a person that way, and if you do have those situations where you have is a name, all you have is an address, that address no longer works, there is that level of there's only so much you can do. Um,
And if you're joining us, a little bit late, feel free to keep typing in questions. Facebook, YouTube, we could see both. So if you want to type in a question for Kirk, we got him for another, 8 minutes or so, and keep it going. But yeah, who owns retention at an organization? Who's like in charge of retention?
in my opinion, it should be the director of development or whomever is in charge of kind of the nonprofit operations, but it's everybody, right? Like, there
Yep.
is not a single person who shouldn't be trying to figure out and employ better strategies for retaining donors. Some of it is going to be in the solicitation itself, right? When you're doing, say, annual giving or things like that, you need to be thinking about not pissing off the donor at such a level that you're going to lose a bunch of donors. One second, pardon.
Well,
Um,
I hear crying
yeah.
upstairs from my side, so we're living it all, Kirk. So there you go. Keep going.
It's important that every single person realizes the importance of those stewardship strategies, and that goes all the way up to the board. It's really important that people understand that timeliness is super important. So
Yeah.
you can't simply like grab a bunch of donations and 6 months later, make the phone calls. There's a famous study that was done, I want to say 4 years ago now, that was done on radio station
Oh,
donations.
not the phone call thing, Kirk. I hate that study.
But but the thing is, as you delve into that study, it's like, well, first of all, the phone calls weren't made until like 6 months
Well,
later.
that's why I hate that study because it's like it implies that phone calls don't work, and it's like, no, you. Oh, I get where you're going with this. Go on. Okay, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
yeah,
shut up. You're the
yeah.
expert. Go on.
I mean that's the reason I'm bringing it up
That's why
is
you bring.
like there's this one study that like basically goes against all of the collective knowledge of the fundraising world, and it's like these don't work, and it's like your methodology was horrible.
That there we go. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I had because it's so horrible. I had such a visceral reaction to you bringing it up, and it's like Yeah. Yes. And it's always, I think, no matter what, and Kirk is really good at this. So I want to make sure that people know where to find you, by the way, and how to follow up with you. So we'll drop that by the end. But Kirk, what I really appreciate about you in particular, and why I want to help you kick this off, is that like it's just this no BS. Like the data is the data, and like where did you get that information? Very inquisitive, and to zero in on that. That's also why we're extraordinarily lucky to have you on the Fundraising Effectiveness Project as well. Um, but for kind of, and keep popping in if we have another question or two. But what can, I'm a tech company, right? I don't direct product, but somebody might watch this. If you can put out a message to the product people out there on what they can do better to make fundraisers' lives easier around retention, what would be your like magic wand to do that?
Holy crap, that's a question. Uh, I think you're gonna stump me here. In the end, I think what it's gonna come down to is um, any way that we could quickly recognize which donors have received what type of solicitation. So for
Mm,
or stewardship strategy. So part of that has to be the ease of entering of that information, right?
yeah,
Because nobody's going to put that data in if it takes like 2 hours to go to the address, then to the phone number under the address. Not that I'm talking about any particular software that might have existed, but like there's a level of the harder you make it to enter that data or to go like, yeah, we called them on this day, the less that data is going to be in there. And once the data is in there, being able to extract quickly like what strategies do work, and are there particular strategies that work better? Because we are moving into a realm where AI is going to be more helpful.
yeah,
And if we can get to a point where we know, or the system can figure out, hey, this particular group of donors are most likely to be retained if you do this particular action with them at this
yeah,
particular time,
yeah.
that prescriptive nature of stewardship then becomes so valuable to the sector. And the only way we're going to get there is to actually have the data in and reliable.
I love that, and I think that you're not too far off where things should go.
Right.
I the one I was going to kind of say that I think would be relatively straightforward even right now if the AI piece is audience retention, like a quick like pull the audience and hey, we can see hearts here too. Look at that. We got a heart. So awesome. Um and it's being recorded so people can benefit from this later on. It's like pull this list and what are the characteristics of this audience that make them similar, like how can we recreate this, or how can we know what's distinctive about like alumni versus not,
Right.
right? And or parents versus students, or they attended a workshop or not, and then just a very quick understanding of like what their retention is. And then I love that added step of, but what's the prescriptive thing that this audience is going to best like act and respond to and engage with. Like maybe the older ones, your AI suggestion for like video thank yous is going to fall flat because none of them know how to open like the thing, right? So I think that's very astute. That is very astute. So I want to ask you and we'll see if there's any final questions here as we wrap up. But what's a kind of magical generosity moment that you either remember executing that you're really proud of as a fundraiser, or, and that's my preferred one, that like the practitioner side, or in the absence of that, like one that delighted you as a donor.
Sure. I think one of the things that we did few years ago, pre-pandemic, way before the end
The
times.
before times.
Yeah, uh, we decided to use Giving Tuesday as an opportunity to call donors who had not been called in a long period of time. So we had a process for calling donors. We had process for thanking, making sure we send out receipts, all of those things. But we decided to go after donors who just hadn't heard from us in a while, and we worked with the entire organization. And so the organization had both an operational component and like not fundraising operations, but like operations. Um, so there's something like 300 staff. Um, and they typically don't involve themselves in the fundraising operation, but we were able to involve them. And I remember looking at the data after we did. So it was just basically a phone-a-thon. That's it.
Yep.
But looking at the data after, the people who received thank you calls from people who were not the foundation, who were not part of the fundraising team. So when some of these other operational people called, including comms, including including like random staff, the retention rate of those individuals was significantly higher the next year
Yeah.
than the people who didn't receive calls or receive calls from just typical, like, here I am, random
You're
fundraising
you're
calling
you're
you.
trying to keep my money. You're trying to get money out of me versus, wait, you actually help the thing that I love?
And how amazing is it to get a phone call from a helicopter pilot who, like, goes out and saves people randomly. Like, it's like, that's just cool.
That's very cool. I want to do that. I want to get a call from a pilot, right? Oh, Kirk, this was a pleasure. And it's funny because Kirk's going to be in a call in about a half an hour or so for FEP. Where can we find you? Where can people follow up and get more information? And we'll pop into our Slack. You could go to the Connected Fundraising Community. It's on the Neon One website if you haven't joined that or stuff like that. We have a nice Slack group. We're going to pop that in. There's over 400 folks in there already. So we'll pop in some fun stuff about FEP. But Kirk, what about you? Where's the best place to connect with you?
LinkedIn is where I spend like 90% of my time.
Yeah.
So and I'm one of the few Kirk Schmidts. There are many Kirk Schmidts, but one of the only ones in fundraising. Um,
Well, I
so
tagged you for today
yeah,
so people can
perfect.
find the post for this and
Yep.
find you. But
And
you're also speaking. Why don't you talk about what you're speaking a bit in the next few months?
sure. So there's the Nonprofit Technology Conference run by N10.
Yep.
So that's NTC. That'll be in Denver. I am talking on cost to raise a dollar of all things. The metric we all love to hate. And I'm doing a whole bunch of research on cost to raise a dollar, and so it's a half-hour session. It's just going to be rapid fire. But talking about using cost to raise a dollar as an investment device and as a
Mm,
device for figuring out where you should allocate money. Um, the so then the next week in New Orleans is AFP Icon,
yep.
and I have a topic called acquisition versus retention, and it's going to be about, like, hey, if you've got an extra $10,000, $100,000, like, where should you allocate it? And it's not as simple as going retention all the time. It's
It's a
there
nice
is a bit of
mix. Yeah.
yeah, there are times when one is more preferable to the other, and we're going to talk about when those situations occur.
I love it. Well, I'll be at both. And I can't wait to hang out in person again. And folks, thank you for our first test of the Connected Fundraising live stream. We're going to try to have these on basically the third Monday of the month. And next month's topic is hey, thanks, Kirk, or thanks, Dave from Proof Pact. Very cool. Good to have you. He's on YouTube, so we know that all of it works. So we're going to drop some resources in. Oh, good. This is nice. But it looks like YouTube people enjoyed that for in particular. But I know Mary Beth asked our primary question today. Kirk, any final words for folks before we sign off?
Retain, retain, retain. Thank your donors.
Thank your donors. Retain, retain, retain. Love it. Thank you so much, folks. We'll see you. We'll see you out there, and let's continue the conversation. We'll throw some resources by end of day, definitely about FEP and more in the Connected Fundraising Slack. So go ahead and check that out. Get some free resources as well to dive deep into this. All right. Talk to you soon.